Good evening, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you want to contact me over production lessons, astrology chart readings, tarot readings, or spiritual guidance, what have you, you can email me and we can set up a session. Generally, we'll charge you about $20 for an hour, and we'll see where we can go from there. And as well, if you want to subscribe to my membership program, the options of what kind of subscription you can subscribe to is in the description. So without further ado, I'm going to be discussing the topic at hand, and that's going to be something I was thinking a little bit about today, and a little bit in general. Is really about the concept of not necessarily the addictive personality, but how artists in general have an addictive personality. Obviously, not all artists have this issue, but including myself and many other artists who are creative, and especially creative in a, I would say, how could I say it, in not a cerebral, but in the other kind of worldly aspect of being creative, right? We're talking about creative people who are innovating the aspects of their art and their craft to the point where it's completely out of this world, where people, experience this art that they've witnessed, and it's a completely different realm of reality and a completely different realm of creation that they've never witnessed before. And this is particularly the kind of artist that you see a lot of the times dealing with issues of substance abuse and addiction to various different things. Usually it's either alcohol or, heroin, cocaine, weed, anything really, psychedelics included, even though those aren't really addictive. It does happen from time to time. And I want to talk about that because I think it's an interesting topic of discussion in terms of why artists, specifically those kinds of those creative type of people, tend to fall into traps of addiction and substance abuse. And from someone who deals with addiction and things of that nature, and someone who is creative, I will say that after giving thought to it, it really comes down to the aspect of experience, right? And all I can really do is talk from my own experience and talk from the perspective of what our other artists went through. And when I say experience, I don't necessarily mean, your day-to-day life, your life experience, although that's a factor, obviously, but I'm talking more about the experience of the art, of the creation that they are making itself. Because what the art is, when you think about it, it is an experience, right? It's a life experience that you are digesting. You're consuming this art and you are living within it. You are sort of going into this different world, so to speak, that this artist has created for you. And this is the thing that relates a lot to drugs, and because what are drugs? Drugs are just a quick and easy way to experience something, experience a different modicum of existence, an experience beyond the constructs of physical reality. And this is very important because when you are an artist, when you are creative, you are kind of constantly in that headspace. You're in that creative mode, so to speak. So it's kind of interesting that creatives and artistic people, especially artistic people who are very in touch with spiritual aspects, a lot of them are very into it. You look at like Jack Kerouac, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Martin Scorsese, all of them dealt with aspects of spirituality, purity, coming together with God. Yet all of them had severe substance abuse issues. And it's kind of interesting because when we think about the traditional religious ways to become one with God or become spiritual, a lot of it has to do with giving up, day-to-day consumptuary, is that a word, consumptuary? Just things that you consume on a day-to-day basis and giving up of them, especially substance abuse, especially like alcohol and any kind of drug. But even though they were heavily rooted in those concepts, and I think like them and other creative people have a deeper understanding of religion and spirituality because they're tapped into that imagination, that creative output, they tend to find themselves being addicted to those same substances, those same addictive patterns of drugs and alcohol, and sex is included, porn, masturbating, all of that things. A lot of artists are hedonists when it comes to sex, if you think about it. Like, a lot of them, you look at artists and you think about how many times they've been married. It's a big issue for them. And this is an aspect where it's like, how come people who can be so in touch with the creative source, with that godly aspect of life, that source of creation, and yet when they come into this reality, it's almost like they have no control over their own physical reality. They have no control over being able to just stop drinking, to stop doing coke, to stop smoking weed, to stop having sex 20 times a week. And these are things that are plaguing artists a lot. There is definitely that argument that's talked a lot about, especially with some people who are in denial of their addictions, where they believe that the substance that they are utilizing is somewhat of a benefit for the creative process, which in my opinion is complete bullshit. There are reasons why I would do certain drugs, and I could delude myself and rationalize why I would do it for creative reasons, but I know that's bullshit. It's never particularly helped me in that way. But I will say that this pattern of, people, artists specifically, being in touch with source, let's just say, in touch with the creative power to imagine things, to imagine experience that is beyond the physical reality. And even though they can do that, they still are attached to drugs and alcohol and all kinds of shit, right? And the reason why I think that is because if you think of art and you think of creativity and imagination and all of that shit, what it boils down to really is experience. It's new experience that is beyond the scope of physical reality, right? It doesn't exist in the physical plane of the world. When you are in a creative headspace, when you are imagining something that doesn't currently exist, you are thinking in the abstractions, the abstract world of imagination and creation. And people who are in touch with that world, usually they have that from birth, are, they like that world. They like that world of abstraction. They're used to it. That is their home, so to speak. That is their baseline normal, if you want to call it that. And then they come into this physical reality. They're in their physical bodies. And, because they spend so much time in this spiritual world, they have no real way to actually build up their physical bodies to have discipline, to actually control their bodies. Because the thing that's different between the artist and, let's say, the spiritual guru or whatever, the person who's not creative in the slightest, but they've attained spiritual enlightenment or spiritual growth through a long process of self-development. And the artist was born with that knowledge and that spiritual enlightenment already. It's just that they didn't need to actually work on their bodies. They didn't need to work on their minds. They didn't need to work on the physical constructs of reality. The difference between them and the spiritual person is the spiritual person had to, is like, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm going to be abstinent. I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to meditate every day. I'm going to do all these things to get to this level. And they build themselves up by sort of letting go of the bodily functions and the ego, essentially. But when the artist is born, they generally have a clear sense of creativity and imagination already there. They're already in touch with the divine, if you want to call it that. And because they're in touch with it, and when they come back to the real world, they realize, oh, fuck this. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be part of this real world, and that's kind of what the mindset I went through, or still go through from time to time. And this is an aspect where it becomes a lot more difficult to deal with addiction as an artist, because you're already there. You don't need to actually overcome the addiction to get to the spiritual enlightenment, to tap into the creative source, because you're already there. You've already experienced that since birth. So you have no reason to stop being addicted. That's kind of why there's a similarity between addicts and artists, because really they just are lazy at the end of the day. We're all lazy because we don't want to actually develop discipline in our bodies and in our minds, because we've already achieved the goal, so to speak. And this is the thing with heroin as well, because it's like it's an easy cop out for not having to put in the work in your life to enjoy and appreciate and be content with your life. So you chase the false reality so that way you don't have to deal with it. And, you know, this is kind of a thing that I think about a lot, because it's definitely interesting. There definitely is a correlation between being artistic and being creative and substance abuse. And this is why I think that it comes down to really about the experience, about wanting to be in that other world. Because don't forget, when you're creative, you're already in touch with that world, and you want to manifest that world, that creation that you have in your head, into the real world, into the physical reality of things. And this happens to me a lot when, you know, I have this vision and an idea for an artistic project that I want to create, and then, but I can also just do drugs. I can also just smoke weed, and I'll get the same kind of satisfaction. I'll get the same reality bending, the reality shift, if you want to call it that, where this creative project I have doesn't need to exist in order for me to be satisfied. This is kind of an interesting aspect that I was thinking about today. And there's actually a book about this, he talks about the concept of the artist versus the drug addict, or the lazy person, or what have you. And it's the book called Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. And he sort of equates drug addicts with artists, and the same thing, except the artist who has attained mastery, so to speak, mastery over their body and their mind, which does happen. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. You look at Martin Scorsese, he had a huge coke addiction, and then, you know, he went to rehab and overcame it, but he still had to go through that process. The difference is that the professional artist who's disciplined understands that they don't need to chase the experience from the outside world. They don't need to take in from an external presence to tap into that spiritual creative world, that it's already within them to begin with. And then once they tap into that, then they can become the master of themselves, and that they don't actually need to chase substances anymore, which is an interesting idea to think about. Because when you think about artists who have addiction problems, they're generally trying to run away from something a lot of the times. You know, there is a deeper part of themselves that they know from birth, that they kind of don't really want to deal with. It's difficult to deal with. This is usually stemmed through an emotional or reptilian or just a source issue that's in their brain that is, you know, poking at them, if you want to call it that. There is like a drive to do something, a drive to change, a drive to see the reality of how things are. And a lot of the times it's too much to take. It's too much to deal with. And they escape through drugs and alcohol because it's more convenient to do that. And they delude themselves with the idea that this substance will make me more creative or tap into my creative resource. What it's really doing is just, you know, alleviating the symptoms of the pain of actually having to deal with your newly found perspective of the world. It's not really new. It's just you were born with it, so you're not really prepared. You don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to deal with this perspective that was just given to you, and you just kind of have to utilize it. And they force it out of them through creative projects and art. But a lot of the times they'll, drink themselves into a depression because they don't know how to deal with it, and that comes through a lot of the times being able to accept things. And it's difficult. It's a lot difficult than a normal person would have to attain discipline in that way, because I'm not trying to put artists on a pedestal or anything like that, because everyone has their place in society. If everyone was an artist or had that creative mindset, the world wouldn't function, because just like everyone would be fucked up in the head. That's the problem with being creative, is that you're kind of fucked up. a little bit. You know, you see things in a different way to the point where it's like painful to exist. It's painful to live, to where you actually just, you know, it'll take you a lot longer to actually deal with your realities. And artists can manage to survive if they, you know, tap into their creative power and manage to create beautiful things that, you know, normal people wouldn't be able to imagine. Which is why I think it's stupid if people are jealous of creative people and creative types, because it comes with a price to be in that kind of way of living, because you have to deal with this perspective of reality that you are not accustomed to and you don't like. And, you know, people will shame you for that because you see things a certain way that you believe to be the truth. And when you express that, people are going to get mad. That's what happens all the time. Has happened and it will always happen, no matter how rigid the structure and how perfect we may make society and whatnot. There's still going to be ignorant people who live in ignorance and bliss, and they can, you know, not be affected by substances so much because they don't have something to escape from. They have nothing to escape from in terms of an experience, a perspective of their lives. And this is also equating to people who've dealt with serious trauma in the past, people who have done terrible things as well, and they're feeling guilty about it. They will tend to gravitate towards substances, to addictive habits, because they don't want to actually deal with the perspective that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And it's the same thing with the artist. The artist has the same exact problem, except this is dealing more with a spiritual reality, a spiritual perspective that they don't want to, you know, deal with. At the moment, at least, they deal with it on time to time when they're creating something, creating a work of art. But then it's like, all right, I'm done. I'm gonna fucking get fucked up tonight because I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to deal with this thought process. I don't want to deal with this reality. I don't want to deal with all this shit going around. Or just take me out of it for like a couple hours or a day or a week or a month or whatever. A lot of artists have like gone on huge benders, and that's why a lot of them can be abusive as well, especially writers who, you know, have that perspective of the world, the observer of the world, who doesn't really want to be here, but they have to be here. They have a job to do, and their way to deal with it is to just get drugs and do it that way, because they're like, fuck this, I don't really want to be here, but I'll do my job anyway. And I think that's the important thing about if you're an artist and how to be productive, and not to feel ashamed if you do fall into traps of substance abuse, because that's just part of the job, you know. But as long as you are creative and you are productive in a way, and you do put in the effort, at the end of the day, you know, that it's kind of irrelevant what you do. Look at Jimi Hendrix and John Coltrane and Mozart and Beethoven, Ernest Hemingway, all these fucking guys, and all these women too, who yeah, they dealt with those things, and they had to, you know, escape through drugs and alcohol, and it ended up coming back to them. They can't just like ignore those facts. They did end up overdosing, a lot of them, like Kurt Cobain, and, you know, that's just part of the gig a lot of the times, and you have to face the repercussions of that. But it's definitely interesting to think about in that way, because, you know, drug addiction is real, but it seems to affect artistic people a lot more than the average person, let's just say. So that's about it for today, and I'll see you next time. Peace.